Hello, welcome to An Eye Toward the Occult with me, your host, who shall remain nameless. Um, so, a little bit about me, real quick. Um, I live in Los Angeles, and here I teach philosophy classes, um, other things. And I've been practicing Zen Buddhism for what is it, 2020? So, I don't know, 5 or 6 years or something. And I've been practicing witchcraft, magic, and occultism for about a year now. But had an interest in those things for a number of years before that. I spent a lot of time reading, researching, and, when I was studying to teach philosophy in grad school, my specialization was the philosophy of religion. So I spent a lot of time in the academy researching these kinds of things and the history of these things as well. So that's a little bit about me. So the question on the table today is, how can one increase their magical power? This is assuming you have found a ritual or two that works for you, and it's not so much about getting started or anything like that. It's just you just want to get better results or results quicker, or have to do less of a ritual, less work to get the result you want. These would all be ways of growing in power when it comes to witchcraft, magic, and the occult. Now, there's a lot of different ways to do this. So I kind of want to break it down into sections. I'll make some preliminary notes, and then we'll talk about what we might call supplemental techniques or practices that you can do that aren't directly, they're not manifestory techniques, I'll say. You're not trying to get something out of it, which is why I consider them supplemental, but they do, in my experience, dramatically increase the potency of your rituals. So, and then after that, I'll talk a little bit more about just things more specific to the craft, and how you can think about that and the rituals that you do engage in specifically, so as to increase your power. So, preliminary remarks, we have to be careful here because power is a tricky idea. I think a lot of people, when they're getting started, and maybe in particular right after they've had their first couple of successes with this kind of stuff, you can get a lot of boneheaded ideas. If you think that this stuff works, then you might get really excited about, well, can I control everything? Can I, control other people? Or, how far can I go here? What is the limit of my power? So, when we're talking about power here, for this video, we're not talking about petty power, right? Where, you have control over every tiny little thing that happens in your day, right? So some people might think of power as like, you're running late to work and you snap your fingers and you're not late. anymore. Or someone says a nasty thing to you at work and you snap your fingers and uh, beam falls on their head, or something like that. That's not what we're talking about here. You're never going to you're never going to become, uh, you're never going to be able to live up to that somewhat childish idea of what a god is or might be like. Um, it is possible to reach a higher level of consciousness and manifestation in this realm. Um, but yeah, if you go into it with a childish idea of what power might look like, then you're gonna get burned. You're gonna Things are gonna backfire on you. You're going to get very, very frustrated. Um, but if we can just really carefully delimit what we're talking about here and just say, no, we're just talking about that when you sit down and do a ritual, that specific action or experiment works more in the way you expected, um, than not, or in some kind of sideways way, um, works quicker, all the things I mentioned at the outset. But I'm not talking about this kind of Bruce Almighty type power. That's never going to happen. And if you are disappointed to hear that, then that actually kind of tells you something about yourself. You need to think about why you would want that. I mean, the whole point of the movie, right, is that you shouldn't want that kind of power. And even if you had it, you would mess things up. Okay, so moving on from preliminary remarks, that's just a word to the wise. But okay, let's get into the nitty gritty. So there are definitely supplemental practices, techniques, things you can do or engage in that will, um, indirectly boost your occult power. Um, and some of these are more effective than others. Like the biggest thing you can do, um, for that is to meditate. Uh, some people don't like that word. You certainly don't have to sit there and chant Om Mani Padme Hum over and over again. It's enough to sit down, for somewhere between 5 and 30 minutes every other day or so, and just wait, just kill time. You don't even have to, you know, focus your attention on your breath. I really tend to think that all that's necessary meditation wise to get results ultimately is to just sit there. Now, I don't want to speculate too much about why this just sitting there technique seems to be like one of the best things you can do for, um, becoming a more powerful witch or magician or occultist. But I suspect it has something to do with mental noise. If you think that the energy or the contents of your mind are what's feeding into your ritual when you're doing it, then yeah, I mean, it certainly would help to have less mental noise. And so giving your brain time to quiet down on its own, um, and then doing that regularly, uh, after a couple of months, I mean, it's going to be pretty amazing to you how much more stillness and quietude there is on the inside. But then I also think you're going to see, and this is more to the point, that your rituals are just going to, they might even get too powerful. And you're like, okay, hold on, let me dial it back a bit and maybe do some smaller things or something. So um, that's the big one. Now, other than that, I mean, certainly like positive thinking, I'm not saying you have to get obsessive about it, but basic practices of gratitude and controlling, monitoring your thoughts and the way that you talk to yourself or about other people or the world on the inside, that seems to help as well. Um, that probably has to do with the mental noise facet of things, like with meditation. Um, it is a bit more, those kinds of practices, thought control practices, are a bit more proactive in a way. So as opposed to just letting the mind naturally quiet down and then just sort of counting on that to passively help you in general, thought control practices can help you determine what you do in fact believe and think about things as opposed to just immediately agreeing to whatever the voice in your head coughs up. Um, and so there's more of a construction of your personality that takes place there, which is cool. Um, so that definitely helps with magical workings, because basically then you're not accidentally mixing in ill intentions and things like that into your magic without knowing it. So if you're used to negative thought patterns and you haven't really practiced monitoring and controlling your thoughts in some way and choosing which thoughts you endorse and do not, um, then yeah, there's going to be all this stuff running through your head when you're doing your ritual that you're not even necessarily aware of, and that can be pretty negative and bitter and resentful and whatever. So you get that stuff out of the way, and yeah, I mean, then when you think you're doing white magic, you actually are, right? Instead of some black magic sneaking in through the back door, so to speak. Um, Okay, but those are just, supplemental things. Those are things that I wouldn't necessarily say are witchcraft or magic or the occult. Those are just other things you can do that really, really make a difference um, when you are doing witchcraft, magic, and the occult. As far as specifically how you go about your workings, your experiments, the craft, um, this might sound strange, but the best thing you can do to become more powerful is to become more scientific and skeptical and kind of almost boring. I know that sucks, but when this stuff can get pretty far out, and certainly in these communities, really quickly you can find yourself speaking in a way which would make you sound totally crazy to the man on the street, quote unquote. People talking about the different deities that they work with and the Fae and stuff like that. Nothing wrong with those things or discussing those things. Um, but, delusion or even just belief um, is it's a means toward an end. It's not the end goal. And so it does ultimately pollute your practice. The more beliefs you have about reality. If you think that, no, there are these different entities and and they have different names, and you're getting really into all of that stuff. And, before long, you'll be speaking a language that pretty much no one else can understand. And that's not a good thing. Um, and perhaps more important than that, you're not even going to be able to measure your experiments in quantifiable ways, or you're not going to be able to learn as much as you think you are. You're not going to be able to improve your practice, your abilities, and things like that. Um, so, what do I mean when I talk about making your practice more scientific and skeptical and that kind of thing? Um, Look, I'm not saying don't do spirit work or don't find your spirit guides or something like that. I've done stuff like that. It certainly works. It can be made to work and so on. So it's more just that like don't hold on to in your inner world, deep down in your bones. Don't be too attached to anything. Like if if it came out tomorrow that there was incontrovertible proof that all of this stuff that you believed in was crap. No, not the practice itself. You know that doing these rituals and things will manifest results. Um, but it's more just that, like, if you found out tomorrow that magic works because of some way of tricking your brain, and that actually none of these entities or anything like that are real. If we had some incontrovertible proof of that, how would you react, right? And I think a big person would go, "Oh, okay, well, I guess how about that?" Um, so if your inclination is to really defend these things and to really get excited talking about them, but one way or another, whether you're really enthusiastic or you're a really staunch defender of these things when you encounter skeptics or whatever, it probably just means you're too attached to the ideas. Um, and I find that that's a detriment to becoming more powerful. Um, in the same way that a scientist who's like too attached to his theory isn't able to see certain pieces of evidence and things that are obvious to everyone else. So, how can you do this more specifically? I think it helps to be familiar with the elements of the scientific method, knowing what words like falsifiability and verification is helpful. Basically, like, look, if you're engaged in an experiment, you, on the one hand, are hoping that the experiment will either confirm your hypothesis or get the result that you intended. On the other, of course, you have to be open to the human tendency to project what we want the outcome to be onto the actual outcome and to overinterpret. And so, if you're wary of that and cognizant of that, then you're going to be somewhat critical of yourself and your interpretation of your own experiences in your practice. It doesn't mean that you don't have experiences that are profound and transformative and whatever, but you'll be hesitant to hold on to too many different words or symbols or modes of interpreting these experiences. Um, if you can make your magical experiments uh, and workings quantifiable, concrete material in some way, I think that's great. So, in other words, instead of doing a ritual for prosperity, do a ritual to turn the small number in your bank account into a big number. That's more scientific, right? It's more measurable, more quantifiable, more concrete. You don't want to put yourself in the kind of situation where 2 weeks later, you find a bag of, I don't know, your neighbor gives you a bag of fresh fruits from his garden, and you feel like, oh, okay, well, I guess there's so much abundance in the world, and I feel grateful for that, and so I guess the ritual worked. Yeah, maybe it did, maybe it didn't, right? I mean, but get specific about what you mean when you say prosperity. Let's get to the point. So that's having that get to the point, let's get literal mindset can help you really focus your rituals, um, and imbue them with more power. Um, and then just in general, when you're conversing with people who agree with you, try to be skeptical. And when you're conversing with people who disagree with you, try to be charitable and interpret them in the best possible light. You never want to be quick to pat yourself on the back, but slow to point out your own mistakes. It should be the opposite. You got to overcompensate. And that's why I tend to think that a subdued, more understated practice, although it's not as sexy and exciting to talk about, it works better, and you will become a true master. So I think that's enough for now. Thank you very much. If you watched, listened, I do hope to improve the video and audio quality soon. I have some tools here, a nice microphone, some editing software that I can use to clean things up, but I just wanted to get this video out. So anyway, thank you very much. This has been an Eye Toward the Occult with me, your host, who shall remain nameless.